Alright y'all, welcome back to the channel and to some more buckshot testing. And today, we've got a really interesting load to test. And it's one that I've wanted to try for a long time, but at least around me in my area, they've been pretty hard to find in your local stores. But I was finally able to find some of these shells to test, so I'm really excited to see what they can do, since we're really going to put them through the full range of tests today and see what they're actually capable of and if they're a decent shell or not. So as for the shell I've got here today, I brought out some of these. These are the Winchester Military Grade double-aught buck shells. They come in this very plain cardboard box, but they are a 12 gauge, 2 3/4 inch, 9 pellet load of double-aught buck. And although it doesn't say a velocity on the box here, online it does say 1325 is the supposed velocity from them. So I have a very good suspicion that these are probably just the exact same loading as the standard Winchester Super X 2 3/4 9 pellet double-aught buck. It's the same brand name, the same loading, the same velocity, everything. And even the cartridge itself here looks the exact same minus the colors. This one is a military green with the black oxide down here on the end of the hull. So I have a very good suspicion that these are probably literally just the same as the standard Winchester buckshot shells, which we will test side by side, especially after seeing what these can do through today's testing. And as for the setup we're going to run them through today, it's not really a military type of setup, but it's going to do exactly what we need it to do and be consistent. But that setup is the Remington 1187 here. But as for a choke, we're going to do some pretty interesting stuff today. So I figured we'll kind of do a two-part test to see if these military grade buckshot shells are actually worth anything or not, because they are sitting right at $1 per round. So to start out with, we're going to shoot 4 of those shells at a distance of 15 yards. I have 4 different chokes out here today. We're going to start out with this cylinder bore choke. So we'll take a shot through a cylinder bore, through an improved cylinder, through a modified, and through a full choke, which are your 4 basic, pretty much most common type of chokes you might have. And at 15 yards, that's pretty much the perfect distance to see what choke these shells do the best with. It allows us to see spread while keeping all of our pellets in a pretty condensed area, and it might also give us a little bit of a clue on defensive range type of pattern as well. Either way, we'll start out by testing the 4 different chokes at 15 yards and seeing which one they like best. And then after we find the best performing choke, we will then reach out to a little bit more distance and see what these can do through that choke. So we will step it out to a shot at 30 yards, a shot at 40 yards, and potentially a shot at 50 yards as well, depending on what kind of a pattern we see and if it would even be worth it to try it or not. So definitely some pretty interesting stuff. We're going to find out what choke they like best and how they do out a little bit farther ranges as well. So enough talking, let's go over here and start out with these 4 chokes and see what kind of results that we can get. Okay, so let's take a quick look at our chronograph velocity before we go measure some stuff here. Supposedly the claim is 1325, but we didn't ever see that. And it is a 28-inch barrel, so we should be seeing their claim out of that length. So we might be a little bit under their claim here, but let's go through the numbers and see what we got. So the first shell was 1216, second shell was 1269, third shell was 1294, and fourth shell was 1279. That gave us an average of 1264, so definitely a little bit under that 1325 supposed claim, but still mid 1200s for a double-aught buck shell. More than good enough for pretty much everything you'd ever use it for. So let's go measure our targets and see what we actually got. Alright, so here is our paper and here's our results. And I gotta say, these patterned very much like a super basic buckshot shell would. And I definitely don't think there's anything fancy about these, which that is kind of military grade equipment in a quick summary right there for you. Either way, we did see some interesting results here. Our cylinder choke up here gave us a 7-inch group. The big slash mark you see in the paper is the gas seal out of them, which we'll look at later. So 7 inches for the cylinder bore choke at 15 yards. The improved cylinder did improve our pattern to 5 1/4 inches at 15 yards. Moving down to our modified choke down there, that gave us right at a 5-inch group, and our full choke gave us a 4 1/2-inch group. So with every choke constriction that we stepped up, we definitely saw a tighter pattern overall, which is kind of what I expected out of these, since there's definitely no fancy wads or anything like that to contend with. So definitely seems like our full choke is the best best performing as far as the tightest pattern goes, but still out to 15 yards, if you had a cylinder bore defensive style shotgun or something, that would still be perfectly usable for you. So let's move on out to a little bit longer range. We'll take a 30-yard shot and a 40-yard shot with the full choke in the gun, and I highly doubt we're going to even bother with a 50-yard shot because I think we're going to struggle to keep pellets on the paper at that point. Just by judging off of what we see here, I don't know that 50 yards is really going to be worth much to us. So let's start out with that 30 and 40-yard pattern, and if it looks good, we'll take a 50. If not, we'll just judge it off of that and we can go from there. So let's head over there with the full choke and see what we can get at a little bit longer range. All right, well, color me surprised. We were actually able to get a 50-yard pattern as well. But let's move in here to our 30-yard paper and start there and see what we got. Okay, here's our 30-yard pattern, and it still looks really good, honestly. It gave us a 10 1/4 inch spread, and that is from that very top pellet up there down to that bottom pellet in the middle. That's the farthest 2 points across. So 30 yards, you're still looking really good. If you want to hunt with this shell or anything like that, you absolutely could with that kind of a pattern. So definitely looking good there, but how does our 40-yard paper look? Okay, here's the 40-yard paper, and I apologize, the sun glare is kind of getting on this one particular target a little bit, but still, we don't see a terrible pattern here. It is pretty centered up, and the total spread gave us right at 18 inches, and that is from that very top pellet down to that bottom left pellet down there. Although 18 inches at 40 yards is a perfectly usable pattern, it's not quite as good as what we've seen out of like flight control buckshot, but it is better than what we've seen out of other cheap buckshot shells that are similar vein to this. Either way, we can definitely start to see a little bit of sporadicness showing up in the pattern. It's not nearly as even as the 30-yard pattern was. We definitely have a flyer or two in here. So I think 40 yards is probably starting to reach about the distance to where these are going to want to scatter a whole lot more. But considering that we had all 9 pellets on the paper at 40 yards, I moved out to 50 and took a shot. So let's see what we got there. All right, and here's our 50-yard pattern. And as you can see, we definitely opened up quite a bit out at 50. So I think between 40 and 50 is probably really where these pellets start to scatter a little bit. Now, we still had a 31 1/2 inch spread, and that is from the top left pellet all the way down to that bottom pellet down there. But if you would have taken that shot out in the field, I mean, you had 4 of them right through kind of the vitals area on a deer there. So you would probably still be okay, but I don't think I'd want to push this pattern much past 40 yards. Now, we will put these up against the standard Winchester shells, as well as run these through a couple different hunting scenario tests in the future. But as for today's test, definitely some pretty interesting results here, because we definitely started to open up once we hit that 40-yard mark. But color me surprised, these shells don't seem to be all that bad. They weren't looking super impressive from the start, but hey, out at 30 to 40 yards, they are still plenty good enough for you. Okay, and here's that little gas seal check piece that sits under the pellets. Definitely nothing too special to see, but it is in the shell, so I figured I'd show it. I think this one hit the paper, which is why it's a little bit crooked, but definitely nothing too out of the ordinary or too special to see. But you can see there the 3 imprints of where the buckshot pellets actually sat. But you can also see all the tiny little golf ball looking dimples from where these are actually a buffered buckshot shell as well, it would appear, which I definitely think helped our pattern more so than just plain old buckshot pellets in a plastic hull. So definitely nothing too special to see here as far as the little gas check piece goes, but it does tell us these are buffered loads, so that's definitely something. All right, y'all. Well, what did you think about those kind of results there from those military grade buckshot shells? Initially, I didn't have the highest of hopes after seeing that 15-yard type of pattern. It definitely wasn't bad, but other shells that have patterned very similar to that have absolutely just come to pieces out at those farther ranges. So I was rather surprised to see about a 10 1/4 inch group at 30 and still only an 18-inch overall group at 40 yards. That's definitely a usable buckshot shell for you all day long. Now, is it military grade necessarily? Probably not, considering they sell it right off the store shelf at Cabela's. I still think there's a good chance that it's probably very similar, if not the same, to their standard Super X shells, but I don't know. We're definitely going to run them against each other and see how they do as compared to one another, so we'll see what happens with that. But either way, not a terrible showing here, and they are a very solid, usable buckshot shell. Now, at $1 a round, I don't know if it's necessarily worth the price, but if it's what you had or what you could get, it's definitely not a bad option, I wouldn't say either. But let me know your thoughts about it down in the comments. Is it about what you expected? Were you a little surprised one way or the other? Have you tested these military grade Winchester shells? And what kind of results have you seen? And would you use a shell that performs like that? And if so, what for? Let me know all that down below. But at the end of the day, definitely some pretty interesting results here. And now we have an idea of kind of what they like moving forward as we test them as well. But with that being said, I've got some more testing to get done for you guys, so I'm going to get back to it. As always, we have the channel Instagram as well as the mailbox where you can send stuff if you'd like. All that information will be in the description if you're interested in it, but I'm going to get back to it, so I'll see y'all in the next one.